So there's a game on Roblox you're probably familiar with by the name of Jujutsu Shenanigans. If you haven't played it, it's a PvP fighting game based on JJK, where you pick a character and beat the hell out of people with their moveset. Sound stale so far? It would be, but the game maintains a few things I really respect. Identifiable moves without overdone VFX, and grounded, solid-feeling combat that doesn't limit you to 1v1s or straightforward duels. In this way, it makes itself different from most other fighting games, even other Battlegrounds games on Roblox. The cherry on top is that there's building destruction, so you can knock your opponent through walls and drop a skyscraper on their head. The, quote, arena feels very dynamic, and it never feels like you fight in the same place more than once. And at some point, something shifted. I stopped thinking, this is so fun, and started thinking, how would I build this? Which, if you're a game dev, you already know that's a very dangerous thought to have. That's the thought that leads to 6 months of work and a mass delusion that you're gonna finish. But foreshadowing, I actually did. Kind of. But I wasn't interested in just copying JJS. What I wanted was to take the ideas, the stuff that makes it feel so good, and rebuild them from scratch in Unity as a full multiplayer RPG, because apparently I hate my free time. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the core parts of JJS that I like, because it's not infallible. I think there's a lot that's left to be desired. Obviously, if we're making a real game, we can't rip off JJK completely, so originality is one important cornerstone. But what it does well goes beyond the usual arena fighter hallmarks. Keyly, the abilities you use have depth and interact fluidly and dynamically with other abilities in the game. That's the thing that grabbed me, ironically, not the destruction that it's so well known for, although that is important too. I wanted abilities to not just look good, but feel good. I want them to be usable in multiple ways for multiple purposes, to get in or out of battle, so you get the cool factor moments that they're so known for. What's lacking for me is that there isn't much in the way of progression. If you master a character, it's in skill alone, which is cool too, but I'm a sucker for stats and learning new abilities, so it's a sore spot for me. So here's the pitch I gave myself, like I was in some sort of unhinged one-man boardroom. What if JJS's combat was mixed with an MMO RPG? Not just an arena fighter limited to 20 players and with a small set of abilities per character, and also not just an MMORPG where it's basically a spreadsheet with buttons. No, I wanted something in between. Pick your race, level up, explore, gain stats and abilities, and use a completely unique build to fight other players in far larger servers with far larger maps. Sound cool? Hell yeah, it does. Sound unreasonable? Hell yeah, it does. But I had already been working on my game Astrolith for quite a while at this point, and playing JJS crystallized a bunch of ideas I'd been struggling to articulate. It gave me a target for how combat should feel, which is one of the hardest parts of designing a game from scratch. Not to mention the fact that I already had some existing multiplayer architecture I was working on and had finished a couple weeks ago, so figure it's a good time. I got to work, and the very first thing I tackled was the biggest task, the ability system. This is the thing I'm proudest of, and also the thing that nearly destroyed me, so let's talk about it. In JJS, each curse technique is essentially a self-contained kit. You get your moves, you synergize, you learn the combos, awesome. But I wanted to go further. I want to make abilities not just completely modular, but also not tied to any specific class or technique. You should be able to mix fire spells with blood magic, with holy shields, and have it all just kind of work together. It's doing myself a disservice, though, to cut down on the amount of effort required to get abilities to this point, so I want to show you the cool bits, and I'll cut out some of the boring intermediary stuff that I got stuck on for 3 months. The gist, anyway, is really simple. Build ability components like deal damage, create a projectile, or play an animation, then arrange abilities out of those components. That's dumbing it down a ton, but it really is that easy now that it's all set in stone. Take Ethereal Prism, for example, a spell from Arcane. It copies any other spell you cast. In any other system, it'd be an absolute nightmare to create, but in our case, it's relatively straightforward. And the best part is that while extending them into these complex, intricate spells is straightforward, simple abilities that just feel good are equally viable, which can sometimes be lost in the sauce for these complicated ability systems. Take Spit Flame, for example. It has a cool animation, it digs through the terrain, and it feels great to hit. Okay, so we have our abilities done, at least for now, and our roster of damaging spells is building, so what's next? For me, the next biggest component of JJS is how your arena changes dynamically as you fight. Craters form, you knock someone through a wall, you kick them up through a ceiling, you get knocked into the subway below you. There's so much you can do with such a simple mechanic, so it's obvious to me that destruction is a must. And somehow, this turned out to be almost harder than the abilities, which seems to be a theme for this video. If you aren't aware, there's lots of ways you can destroy things. Astroneer, Red Faction Guerrilla, and even Minecraft are all great examples. I won't go into a crazy amount of detail, but trust that each uses a completely unique method with its own advantages and disadvantages. For our use case, I chose 2 separate systems. 1. Dual contouring for our terrain, and 2. A 2-pass method, first voxelization and then surface nets for our props. It sounds super complicated. I'll break it down very easily for you. Dual contouring is a little bit slower, but it has a sharper, more refined look to it, which I find to be better looking for natural features in the terrain. And the 2-pass method for the props is just a speed up opportunity where we pre-voxelize things, which means we break them down into cubes, and then we quote cast a surface net over those voxels and create a smooth replica of the original mesh. What that means is it boils down to we have very fast destruction of the terrain, very fast deformation of the terrain for things like the terrain editor, which I'll show you in a minute, and then we also have very fast prop destruction, which allows those moments where you kick someone through a wall and so on. Unfortunately, all large-scale destruction is slow as hell until you accelerate it, so I spent a week or two banging my head against my keyboard trying to figure out how to slip these implementations into GPU compute shaders, but in the end it worked, and now they're actually blazingly fast even on low-end computers. Here's where we kind of separate entirely from the JJS model though. If you're astute, you probably recognize I said terrain and talked all about terrain destruction. That's because Astrolith is a fantasy game, so quite a bit of it takes place in fields, out in the tundra, or in deserts, all of which aren't these massive developed cities. There's no Shibuya and there's no Shinjuku, in other words. So if we want to keep the destructive anime feel, these biomes need to be almost like sandboxes. All of them are equipped with the terrain destruction I mentioned, and that means that if you get into a high-level fight, you can cleave mountaintops off and leave plains littered with massive craters. You can throw your opponent back, and where they hit will leave a dent, and if you're fighting in the forest, you can plow through the massive trees just like you can with buildings. This is really important to me. JJK, the anime itself, that is, has this feeling of fighting over story, but I want people to get attached to their characters, so having a world you can run around and explore that's very expansive matters a lot to me, without abandoning the destructive feel that you get from JJS. And as with every section so far, I'm skimming over a lot of detail here. Just trust that it took a long time to hone in on the right graphics for this project. I'm aiming for something a little cartoony, but mainly leaning toward the almost Ghibli-esque tones of Frieren. I think Frieren is a generally good medium between action and story as far as anime go. Finally, I want to talk about character building. JJS obviously lacks this entirely, which is fine for a genre, but not really what I'm looking for mine. You log in and you use whatever avatar you have and pretend you're whatever character you pick. But in Astrolith, your character's your own, so customization and progression are really important. The first pass I take is clothing, hairs, and accessories, and altogether these are pretty easy. They're just a little tedious and time-consuming, honestly, but once they're done, things feel much cleaner. You can dye things too, which adds a nice touch of customization, but that's still lacking progression, right? You start with clothing. It's not what you get when you get to the max level, so how do we really nail the feeling of character evolution without pigeonholing you into being completely useless without stats, or, in other words, removing the skill from the game? The answer to that question, at least in my opinion, is making the stats diverse and interesting. In our case, we have 4: Vitality, Attack, Spirit, and Agility. Vitality and Attack are your bread and butter health and damage stats. You can't really go wrong with these, but they're fairly boring, on purpose. Agility and Spirit are where you go for weird builds that complement more fringe or out there abilities and playstyles. Agility gives you access to heavenly restriction type speed moves, as well as makes your M1s and dashes faster. Spirit, conversely, increases your mana pool, which in turn increases the size of your Frieren-inspired mana aura, and increases your mana reinforcement ability. And at this point, I was fairly satisfied with what you could do with a character. So we've made a game. I played some Roblox, and I felt inspired and spent an unreasonable amount of time acting on it. The modular abilities, combat rhythm, visual feedback, everything traces back to sitting in games like JJS and picking apart what feels good about it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Astrolith, my game, isn't a JJK or even a Frieren game, and in fact, kind of betrays a lot of the inspiration in some areas, but that's because it's its own world. It has its own lore and it has its own identity too. The DNA is there, and honestly, I think that's how games get made. You play something that clicks and you reverse engineer why it clicked until you can replicate it. I hope that you guys can kind of understand and agree with me, and I hope you enjoyed what I had to show today. There's more on the way. This is a very basic overview of my first chunk of development. This is actually a couple months outdated, but if you want to follow along, everything's linked below, and I post weekly showcases in our Discord. Thanks for watching. Bye.